welcome Greg to share with us today what they've been working on in Sussex County regarding the proposed biogas facility. So Greg, I'll turn things over to you.
Sure. Thank you, Dee. It's a pleasure to be here. Let me share my screen. What's going on here? Present. Okay. Can everyone see okay?
Looks good.
Good. Today I want to talk about a couple of so-called anaerobic digesters proposed for Sussex County. We call them methane refineries because that's what they do. They extract methane from poultry industry waste for sale on the Chesapeake Utilities pipeline. One of them, I guess, is talking about generating electricity, but they're making methane. So we call them methane refineries, just to be precise. So I'll tell you a little bit about them. There's two companies. One's called Bioenergy DevCo and the other is Clean Bay Renewables that have, I misspelled the word have, proposed building anaerobic digesters in Sussex County, one south of Seaford and one south of Georgetown. Together, they would collect hundreds of thousands of tons of poultry industry waste, which is litter or slaughterhouse sludge, and use it to generate methane gas. The Bioenergy DevCo plant would truck that methane to the Chesapeake Utilities pipeline for sale, and the Clean Bay Renewables plant would probably combust the methane to generate electricity. I say probably because their plans seem to be up in the air. The proposed solution, the poultry industry wants you to believe that anaerobic digesters or methane refineries are magic, and that when they put poultry waste into them, it disappears and doesn't create anything other than clean methane. And that's not true. They're doing a lot of hand waving to distract people from some of the problems. It would create air pollution. It would create water pollution. And by that, I mean pollution in drinking water and pollution in surface water. It would bring heavy truck traffic to the areas near the plants. They would both impact communities that are below the poverty line in Delaware, but the one near Seaford would be in a community that is largely Latinx. It's composed of people of color at 3 times the rate of Sussex County as a whole. We also believe it would lead to poultry industry expansion. And while Food and Water Watch is not opposed to eating chicken, we do think there are a lot of problems associated with the poultry industry, and that these proposals would lead to expansion. And it would also have an impact on climate change. And I'll get into all these topics a little bit in a minute. So first of all, the air pollution. Digesting the animal waste to generate methane often releases smog-forming nitrogen oxides, ammonia, and hydrogen sulfide. These chemicals have been linked to chronic lung disease and cancers. The ammonia is a particular concern. A study came out earlier this year that linked ammonia associated with the dairy industry with thousands of deaths across the United States every year. And I'm no scientist, but I have no reason to believe that ammonia that comes from dairy waste acts any differently on the human body than ammonia released from poultry waste. So this process would release a lot of these chemicals, and particularly for the people who live nearby, we believe they could have health problems. Another impact of the waste, these refineries would leave behind hundreds of thousands of tons of polluting byproduct. One of them alone will take in 200,000 tons every year of slaughterhouse sludge, or the gross, nasty material that's left behind at the end of chicken slaughtering. That sludge would be processed by the anaerobic digester, but at the end of it, there would be byproduct. The industry would like to sell this byproduct as fertilizer, which means it will be spread on the fields. And when it's spread on the fields and runs into waterways and groundwater, it has big problems. 90% of Delaware's waterways are already unfit for fishing or swimming under the standards of the Clean Water Act, and we believe this would just make it worse. Another water pollution problem is the nitrates. The nitrates released by these refineries would enter groundwater and have serious consequences. Nitrates in drinking water have been linked to birth defects, miscarriages, cancers, and other things. According to the EPA, Delaware leads the nation in nitrate pollution. And according to the Department of Education, Delaware ranks in the top 10 worst states for children with disabilities and developmental delays. We've not followed molecules from the rear ends of chickens out the back door onto fields and down into the drinking water. But a University of Maryland study, which I can share with anyone who's interested, a University of Maryland study has linked the operations of the poultry industry with the high nitrate pollution in Delaware. Another impact would be traffic. Both of these companies, Clean Bay Renewables and Bioenergy Devco, have been very vague about the traffic they would generate. They skipped DelDOT traffic assessments, but according to their documents, the site between Seaford and Laurel would be the start of or end of at least 20,000 truck trips per year. The site south of Georgetown would be the start of or end of about 10,000 trucks per year. The Clean Bay Renewables or the Bioenergy Devco plant would see more trucks because they're shipping gas to the Chesapeake Utilities pipeline. And the other site would, like I said, probably generate electricity. So they have fewer trucks, but still that's a lot of trucks, particularly on the road south of Seaford Road. That's just a lot of trucks in a residential neighborhood. The trucks that would be near Georgetown would be on US 113. So it'd be a little less of a problem, but we still think it's a big deal. Environmental injustice, as I mentioned earlier, the methane refinery south of Seaford would be in a community that is composed of people of color at almost twice the rate of Sussex County as a whole. I said 3 times, and I want to be accurate. It's home to people of color at almost twice the rate of Sussex County as a whole, and home to people living in poverty at almost 3 times the rate of Sussex County as a whole. And to place a dirty and dangerous industrial plant in their midst just seems unjust. These are not going in. I understand why you wouldn't want to put a methane refinery in a fancy upscale development, but at the same time, these are going into poor neighborhoods and people who don't have a lot of representation. A few months ago, actually in August, I went door to door in Seaford near the plant, within half a mile of the plant. When I went door to door and spoke to people who primarily speak Spanish. I had an interpreter. So these people primarily speak Spanish, and none of them had heard that this plant was coming to their neighborhood. I spoke to the business directly across the street from the entrance to the proposed plant, and they didn't know about it either. This has been covered in some of the local newspapers, but the industry is just not informing people terribly well. While I'm on this slide, I'll go off on a bit of a tangent. DENREC employs a person called the Community Ombudsman. His duty is to inform people of environmental concerns going into their neighborhoods and to help those people participate in the decision-making process. Beginning in May, Food and Water Watch and several other organizations began contacting the Community Ombudsman, asking him to get involved in this situation and to help inform the community about what's going on. And he made one meeting, or he scheduled one meeting, and then he canceled at the last minute. He promised to call someone else back, but he didn't call that person back. So 6 months went by and he was non-responsive. So finally, Food and Water Watch and our allies went to the media and complained that DENREC was not responding to our concerns and was not helping the people it's charged with helping. So the very next day, the day after we put out our press release, the DENREC deputy secretary wrote to me and said, oh, this is a concern. We're sorry it took us so long to get back to you, and we will help inform the people in that community, and we will hold a hearing for this community in Spanish. I objected to the word hearing because there will be 9 permits required for this plant to go into operation. And normally that would mean 9 hearings. And with 9 hearings come 9 30-day comment periods. That would allow people to read thousands of pages of material, run it by lawyers if they can afford lawyers, run it by environmental groups if they happen to be in contact with environmental groups, and then provide some informed response. But DNREC proposed wrapping these 9 permit hearings into 1 hearing permit with 1 30-day comment period. And we just don't think that's fair, considering it will be thousands of pages of documents, highly technical documents for people to read. And then when I went back to DNREC and said, could you consider holding at least 4 hearings, 1 for water permits, 1 for waste disposal, 1 for air permits, and there was another one. I can't remember what we came up with, but we had 4 hearings that we suggested. And at that time, DNREC said, oh, actually, we don't want to get involved with this right now because they haven't formally applied for hearings. Thank you. So we'll see what they do. So they've at least hinted that they'll be helpful, but at the same time they were promising to be helpful, they were also shortcutting the public comment process. This is the community where the facility south of Seaford would go. If you can see my cursor, this is a composting facility that's there already. That composting facility has been cited by DNREC for unhealthy levels of chromium-6 and fecal bacteria in the compost they produce, but that hasn't caused them any major setbacks. They're now prepared to go forward and make methane. I'll show you this community up here at the top, the Sussex Manor Mobile Home Park. That's home to a couple hundred residents, and that's where I went door to door. It's mostly Hispanic community. And to the southeast, which is off this picture, there's a larger mobile home community that we just haven't had the time to go door to door yet. We're going to be working with the Delaware Working Families Party, we hope in the next few months, to reach out to more folks. This is one of the homes in the Sussex Manor Mobile Home Park. As you can see from the small bike, there are children present, a lot of elderly people, very nice people. They were very welcoming. Normally people in these communities don't want to answer the door for someone going door to door with a clipboard, but they were welcoming and brought us in, and it was a very hot day. They all offered us something to drink and offered us to sit down, and they were very nice, and we want to keep working for them. Another reason that we oppose these anaerobic digesters or methane refineries is that we believe they will lead to the expansion of the poultry industry. Again, I'm not opposed to the poultry industry per se. I eat chicken. I live across the street from a poultry house, and it seems to be a mostly clean operation, but there's just a lot of negative side effects to raising poultry on Delmarva. The nitrate pollution, which I mentioned, the ammonia pollution, which just the other day, a study came out that it's right here. The Midwest livestock operations are linked to a rise in ammonia pollution. So just now, scientists are beginning to study the link between these operations and ammonia output. The analogy that I often use is trash. If someone paid you to put trash on your curb every week, instead of you paying to put it out, if they paid you, you would probably put out more trash. So this scheme by the poultry industry would simply generate more money off of their waste and would incentivize them to keep doing what they're doing, only making money off of it. And we think that there have got to be a better way to handle their waste. Climate change is another concern related to these projects. Methane is a greenhouse gas 90 times more potent than CO2, and facilities like this typically leak at least 50% of the methane produced into the atmosphere. I saw the other day a study that said it was more in closer to 15% of the methane leaked. But since I've seen multiple opinions, I'm going with the lower one in this case to say they'll leak 5% of what they produce. When combusted, the methane produced by the Bioenergy DevCo facility each year would release CO2 equivalent to a typical car driving 98 million miles. Now, some environmental organizations will tell you that methane is bad and burning it to produce CO2 is better. And I can understand that argument to an extent. It's my position and the position of Food and Water Watch that we need to transition away from using carbon-based fuels at all. Ideally, Food and Water Watch would like to see us stop using fossil fuels by 2030. I know the Biden administration is talking about 2050, but creating another source for carbon-based fuels doesn't seem to move us in that direction as quickly as I would like. I'll let other people make up their minds about that, but it would produce CO2 and leak some methane, and ultimately that all drives climate change. Now, I mentioned other environmental groups, and I don't want to say too much negatively about them because they do great work like environmental education and some testing on local rivers. But we found that several environmental groups that have spoken in favor of the Bioenergy DevCo refinery have financial ties to Purdue Farms. Purdue Farms has a 20-year contract to supply slaughterhouse waste to the proposed methane refinery near Seaford. The Delaware Secretary of Agriculture sits on the boards of one of those groups. As you can see here, the Nanticoke Watershed Alliance, which is one of the most outspoken groups in favor of the refinery, received $30,000 from Purdue, and Purdue sits on their board. That's a little concerning to us. They've gone so far as to share Bioenergy DevCo Facebook posts promoting them as a clean supplier of compost and so on and so forth. When I've confronted them about this, they've said, well, we're a 501c3 organization and we're not allowed to take political positions. But that doesn't seem to hold them up when they're taking political positions in favor of the project, which, as I will get into in a moment, has been before Sussex County and will soon go before the state of Delaware. Also, a former DNREC secretary, who's a decades-long state employee, is now representing Bioenergy DevCo as it applies to DNREC for environmental permits. When we've tried to communicate with DNREC, as I said, we've had difficulty getting a response. We've sent FOIA requests, Freedom of Information Act requests, to DNREC to get information about their dealings with Bioenergy DevCo. And we found lots of emails from this former DNREC secretary back and forth with DNREC. He doesn't seem to have any difficulty making contact and lobbying his position, even though officially he's not supposed to have any better ties with DNREC than we are, since he is now a former employee. But I raise this because you probably, if you look into this issue very far, you'll find the Nanticoke Watershed Alliance, Center for the Inland Bays, and a couple of others supporting the digester plan. But so far, I'm batting 1,000 on Googling the names of those organizations and Purdue Farms and finding that they received money. They'll argue that they can do more working with industry than working against industry. And maybe they have a point. Maybe in the long run, they'll be proven right. But currently, Food and Water Watch does not believe that we should work with industry to police industry. I'll give you a little bit of background on what I do and what Food and Water Watch has been doing. I came on board with Food and Water Watch in March. I'm a former educator, English teacher, and former journalist, and I came on board in March. Food and Water Watch has been fighting against the Bioenergy DevCo proposal since late 2020. In particular, we fought to persuade Sussex County government to deny the conditional use permit that Bioenergy Devco needed to go forward. We were not successful in that. In February, we organized a submission of more than 100 public comments in opposition to the proposal to Sussex County Planning and Zoning. We held informational meetings. We encouraged letters to the editor, and we released the first version of our sign-on letter to Governor Carney, which was signed by more than 30 groups. Ultimately, both Sussex County Planning and Zoning and Sussex County Council voted unanimously in favor of this proposal. In fact, in a meeting that they did not advertise in the newspapers, Sussex County Council agreed that Bioenergy Devco should receive up to $60 million in tax-exempt bonds to support their proposal. We argued that this money was awarded illegally because they did not advertise the vote. They did not advertise the meeting. They came back and said they did put a notice about it on a bulletin board in the Sussex County Administration Building. Now, that Sussex County Administration Building happened to be closed at the time due to COVID-19, but I guess they checked that box, and the Department of Justice sided with them. As I said, we organized calls to Sussex County Council and members of the council, and a number of our allies testified before the council. So Bioenergy Devco is now waiting for state permits, or they have not even applied yet. They said that they would apply within 60 to 90 days of getting their county permits, but they have not applied yet. Now I'll move on to Clean Bay Renewables, which is attempting or wants to build a facility south of Georgetown. Food and Water Watch had not initially fought this project because I didn't come on board in Delaware. I'm a Delaware native, but I didn't come on board with this position until March. And Clean Bay Renewables got its conditional use permit from Sussex County in 2018. But in our reading, we realized that they had a 3-year window to begin construction on their property. Technically, under Sussex County Code, they were supposed to have their project, quote unquote, substantially underway by August 1st, 2021. And as you can see from this aerial photograph that I took, they had not begun construction by August 1st, 2021. The disturbed earth you see in the middle of this image is an abandoned house that Clean Bay destroyed in August or September of this year after the deadline, but you can tell that no work on a facility has been started. Now, substantially underway is a legal definition in Sussex County Code. That means that a project has to have cleared and graded for stormwater management, for roads and or streets and parking, and basically started work. As you can see from this image, they had not done that. In early September, or actually, yes, in early September, Sussex County Planning and Zoning staff went out to this site and saw what I saw and what you see, that's nothing happened. So Sussex County Planning and Zoning staff went back and recommended that the permit be pulled, that the permit is null and void. And the county agreed, but Clean Bay Renewables complained and said, we don't want you to do this to us. Please do something different. So in a September, I believe 9th meeting, Sussex County Planning and Zoning voted to, quote unquote, give them the benefit of the doubt and declare that the project is underway, even though we can all see that it's not. So Food and Water Watch has now filed suit in Superior Court against the Planning and Zoning Commission on 2 grounds. One, that the project is not substantially underway. No work has been done, therefore their permit is null and void. And secondly, the way we read the county code, this wasn't Sussex County Planning and Zoning's decision to make anyway. Under county code, administrative decisions should be reviewed by the Board of Adjustments. But the Board of Adjustments never heard this case. So we're hoping to prevail. They've received our suit. I'm not sure when we'll go to court. We've also gotten a member of the community who lives off to this on this road to the left here. It's called Brazier Road. His name is actually Jacob Brazier. The road was named after his family. He is signed on as an appellant. So we've got the members of the local community on our side, and we're trying to go forward. So in general, with both of these plants, we're still fighting. We're fighting a statewide campaign against the environmental permits. So far, that has involved us sending more than 1,000 text messages to our members, encouraging them to write letters to the editor and to speak out. We have a sign-on letter, another one, to Governor Carney with 35 signers. I'll go over some of the signers in a minute. We'll release that letter in January, letting him know that a lot of faith groups, social justice groups, and environmental groups oppose this plan. And we have more than 200 individual messages to Governor Carney. In a minute, I can put a link to that in the chat for anyone who's interested. But we've provided some language that explains our case against these proposals, but the language can be modified. If you wanted to write something different in your own words to emphasize a different point, that's all fine. We're still promoting that. If Clean Bay Renewables has to go back and seek their permits again, as we hope, we will fight them on a county level as well. But right now, both of them are waiting to apply to the state for the 9 environmental permits that I mentioned. So what our letter asks Governor Carney to do is to oppose permits for Bioenergy DevCo, and we'll be adding Clean Bay Renewables to that once they get completely past the county process. We ask Governor Carney to oppose tax incentives or other forms of public support for the expansion of animal waste-based biogas. We ask Governor Carney to oppose the inclusion of animal waste-based power in the Delaware Renewable Portfolio Standards definition of renewable energy and in renewable energy credit or incentive programs. We ask Governor Carney to oppose the award of renewable energy grants or loans for the construction of anaerobic digesters on digesters that rely on industrial livestock or the poultry industry. And we ask Governor Carney to oppose new gas pipeline construction. About a month ago, Governor Carney released a plan for climate change, the way Delaware will address it. And in a 112-page document, Governor Carney mentioned, or DENREC, whoever wrote the plan for him, mentioned renewable natural gas 22 times. A lot of the credit that, a lot of the incentives that Delaware wants to give for renewable energy seems to be targeting renewable natural gas, which, as I said, is not free from climate consequences. It still releases CO2 and leaks methane. I wish that he had just focused on wind, solar, tidal energy, possibly geothermal. But they, as I said, they had a lot of language in the governor's plan supporting renewable natural gas or methane. It's methane. They can give it a green sounding name, but it's methane. Some of the groups that have signed on to our letter are Protecting Indian River, Community Housing and Environment Empowerment Connections Incorporated, the Delaware Environmental Justice Community Partnership, Delaware, well, I should take Delaware Interfaith Power and Light off. They're working on another project. Sierra Club Delaware chapter, Delaware Civil Rights Coalition, Delaware Hispanic Commission, the Progressive Democrats for Delaware, the Newcastle Presbytery, and we've got like 67 Presbyterian churches have aligned to support our position. Southern Delaware Alliance for Racial Justice, Sussex Health and Environment Network. I could go on. Like I said, there's 35 groups, and I have not listed them all here. We're hoping that Plastic Free Delaware will also join us in signing this letter, and I am currently reaching out to other groups as well. Like I said, we plan to release our press release in January, but we welcome as many groups as we can get. So that's my presentation. If anybody wants to reach out to me, they can do so at G Layton at Food and Water Watch or fwwwatch.org. I'll stop sharing. If anyone has any questions, I'd be happy to entertain them. I'll try to give you honest, accurate answers as best as I can.
Thank you so much, Greg. You might want to throw your email in the chat just in case, because that screen came and went fast.
Oh, sure.
So if you want to throw that in there, then people can grab it. So yeah, I think we generally just kind of have discussion. So if anyone has questions or comments, they're free to unmute themselves and ask. If you want to raise your hand, you can, but I think we're a small enough group today. We can just have open discussion. One question I have is, and maybe this is sort of a naive question, but obviously Delaware is a poultry industry state now already. And so what is happening with all of this waste now?
Currently, most of it ends up on fields. I'd say nearly all of it ends up on fields.
It's composted and then spread on fields?
It's not necessarily composted. The typical poultry house lets the chickens go to the bathroom for 2 years, at least a year or two inside the house, and they spread straw and wood chips on top of it, and then they scrape it out and they have to dispose of it. So farmers downstate, it's a very sandy soil, as you know, so they have a hard time keeping nutrients near the surface of the ground where they want to raise crops. So they spread the chicken, they call it chicken litter. It's manure and wood chips, but they spread the chicken litter on the fields. In some cases, they don't have anything to do with it right away, so they pile it up. I mean, it's not uncommon to see a pile that's 20 feet tall sitting in a shed or in a field. Bioenergy DevCo plans to take slaughterhouse waste with the stuff left over after the chickens are butchered and process that. And that's currently handled through wastewater treatment and then also spread on the fields. So,
okay, but yeah, I guess my question isn't about the manure side of things, but the actual chicken parts that are remaining after they're processed. So right now, I'm sure they're not spreading chicken parts on fields. I'm assuming it's composted and then spread on fields. Is that what you're saying?
Composted might be the right word. The parts are mostly sold, but the stuff we're talking about is called DAF scum. It's basically blood, oil, and grease. And that is run through wastewater treatment. So I guess you could say it's composted. It's treated with some sort of microorganisms, which decays it a little bit, which also releases ammonia, by the way.
But that would probably, my guess is that would only be the liquid and not the solids. They're not sending all the solids into the wastewater treatment plant, are they?
I'm less clear on that, but it after it's treated, it all ends up on fields.
I guess my question goes to the point that to get a better understanding of how, because it's obviously a huge industry now in Delaware. So how are they dealing with this waste now? And why are they, what is the argument for the need for this new facility? Beyond how they're currently handling this waste?
Mhm.
Is there a reason why they say they need this new treatment plant? Or, it's not a treatment plant, but you know what I mean?
Yeah. I mean, it's kind of like anytime there's a problem and people yell, do something, and something is vague. So they know they have a problem and they know they need to do something. So this is something.
Well, what is the problem though? I guess is what
The
I'm asking.
problem is the waste, which, like I said, most of it ends up on the fields. And when it seeps into the groundwater, it pollutes our drinking water, it pollutes our rivers and streams. I'm a I'm a Sussex County native, and I remember as a kid going to state parks, and you could swim in Trap Pond, you could swim in Killen's Pond. They had lifeguard stands and bathing facilities and so on and so forth. You can't do that anymore because the waters are just too thick with bacteria and nutrients, which come indirectly from the poultry industry. So they know they have a problem with waste. This is doing something about it, but like Bioenergy Devco will take about 200,000 tons a year of the slaughterhouse sludge, but it won't disappear. They're going to take methane out of it, but then they're still going to sell it as fertilizer, so it's still going to end up on the fields. Only they make some money out of it from the natural gas or the methane. Now, as far as them selling it, uh, they don't have. One of the reasons we think that they're slow with their proposals or slow with their permits is they don't have promises for all of their fertilizer. This would be more expensive than what uh, farmers are used to using, and there just doesn't seem to be a market for it. Now, what options does the industry have for responsible waste handling, as David asked? That's a little less clear cut. Food and Water Watch often tells people it's not our job to solve the poultry industry's problems. We just know that this is a false solution. But pasture raising poultry and other methods are more environmentally sustainable. It seems like the methane and the ammonia come when the waste is stored and gets wet. If it was spread out more evenly on a natural surface like a pasture, it wouldn't cause the same amount of problems because it would be processed by cover crops and things like that. This is a pie in the sky long-term solution, but we promote something called the Farm System Reform Act, which Cory Booker introduced in the Congress in the summer. And it would put a moratorium on new factory farms, I think starting in 2040, which is a ways in the future. But it would put a moratorium on new factory farms, and it would provide federal money to factory farmers to transition to more sustainable methods. Um, I'm an expert in this particular problem. I'm not necessarily an expert in all the sustainable methods, um, but we support that, transitioning them to a better model. Their current model just isn't sustainable. I mean, unless you just want to write off all the rivers and streams in Delaware and just say, that's it. We don't expect to fish or swim in them because we make too much money off of poultry. And I mean, you're right. Poultry is uh, a huge industrial driver in Delaware. I think I looked, and 5 of the 10, 15 largest employers in Delaware are chicken plants. Um, so, I mean, largest employers as far as numbers of people employed. I don't think they're terribly well paying, but they do keep a lot of people alive. So, yeah, we look for a long-term solution, and we think that biogas or digesters are just a false solution that helps keep the current system in place.
Indeed, and I just in my work in actually in my past work in the transportation field and land use planning, I learned that it's always great if you can propose an alternative rather than just fight whatever it is you're fighting to, to oppose it. If you can say, we oppose this, here's why, but here's what we think is a better solution, because we recognize that there is an issue. And Plastic Free Delaware's interest in this subject is based on we also have a program that we're doing more and more with called Zero Waste First State, which is all the zero waste initiatives. So that's why we are interested in the topic. And obviously I just haven't myself looked into the how the poultry industry is handling this now. So I think that would be an important component of your outreach, to say, we recognize there's a problem, but here's what we think, is a better solution.
Yes. And unfortunately, it just seems like the entire industry needs to be reformed, and that's going to need a lot of financial support, because people's lives depend on it, and it employs a lot of people. And they've invested a lot in the infrastructure of what they're doing. But so any solution I have is not really a short-term magic bullet or a silver bullet, but yes, that's something.
Right. Change takes time, but we ought to start now, right? To try to get there. John asked a question in the chat about out of state waste. And John, I had the same question. And we've been sort of asking about that same, a similar question dealing with food waste, which obviously chicken waste counts as food waste, but the industry is sort of different than we've been looking into household food waste and the need for more composting options for Delaware citizens and businesses. So anyway, we've been working and having conversations with DENREC about that issue. And also I've been involved, as I think you have too, in issues around the Minquadell landfill, now owned by Waste Management, and the fact that they're bringing in C&D waste from out of state. So the short answer is from DENREC that I guess maybe from federal law, the state is not allowed to not allow waste to be transported from state to state. So like the Minquadell landfill has C&D waste coming in from out of state, and there's no way we can say, no, you're not allowed to accept that out of state waste. So this is, apparently this situation is also the same, where that's not an by shutting the door to poultry waste, in this case from other states, it's just not an option from, I guess, from a federal law perspective. So,
yeah, I didn't know there was a regulation about interstate waste, but I do know that Bioenergy's contract with Purdue would take all of its slaughterhouse waste from Maryland, Delaware, and Virginia and bring it to Seaford.
yeah.
And because this stuff is difficult to transport, that means the byproduct or the fertilizers that results from it would come, would be probably locally sold. It wouldn't be sent back to the places it came from. I see that.
Yeah, and the other poor example of this same issue is the composting facility that we used to have in Wilmington for food waste. The I'm drawing a blank on the name, but Peninsula, that was shut down a few years ago. That it was the same issue. They were bringing in food waste from out of state, even New York City. But the problem was not only the volume, but also it was contaminated with all kinds of trash and plastic and everything. So they were not ending up with a clean compost product. Even though the idea, we definitely need some sort of industrial scale food waste solution in Delaware, but Peninsula was a great example of that was one of my concerns, is the out of state, by having to accept out of state waste, it complicates things more, and it and the volume just increases tremendously. So you're not, it's just a whole nother league of operation, but apparently they're not allowed to, not allow it. So Anyway, does anyone else have any
I see
questions out
David.
there? Feel free to unmute yourselves. So David, you want to chime in?
I asked the question about options, and I agree with you, Dee. It's good if you can present an option that would be better. I know of one that works from personal experience because I've seen it. I was driving trucks in with liquid waste myself, going to a treatment pond at Star Mushroom outside Avondale, Pennsylvania. And they were filling a shed constantly with walking trailers, covered walking bed trailers full of poultry waste. You could identify it instantaneously. I mean, it's full of feathers and chunks of, bone and stuff, and it smells like bird. And they were using that as a component in mushroom soil composting operations that they hold there. And now it's not going to be cheap, maybe compared to the option that they're proposing, which is probably why they're proposing this as as the option they prefer. The stuff probably has to be kept to be composted properly. It might have to be kept under covered sheds, so it couldn't get too wet. But that would be aerobic digestion, if I understand correctly, rather than anaerobic, and it would wind up producing carbon dioxide instead of methane. And since methane, if I remember the promotion for this meeting, methane has a greenhouse effect 90 times that of carbon dioxide, then if you've got a 5% leakage rate, you're already way over the line in terms of increasing the amount of damage that would be done by simply digesting this stuff some other way, whether it's happening on open fields, as it's done in agriculture, or being done in some kind of more responsible composting operation, which would contain the runoff water, incidentally. The mushroom farms, the one I was at, anyway, they take all the drainage off the concrete pad and it has to go in a big tank and be further processed in their own wastewater treatment processing facility so that the nitrogen doesn't get into the creek right next door. So the options exist, and that's why I asked about it. I guess one way to find out about them might be to find out if any other jurisdictions, even elsewhere, like, for example, Europe, they've got poultry farms, and they often do things in an environmentally more responsible way than we do. One last idea is, if these digester operations have been in use in other communities, is it clear the damage that's been done in those communities as a result? Can that be documented? Because I can see how politically in Delaware, it shouldn't play very well for us to be importing other people's garbage if problems come with it.
Yeah, there are digesters. I think they're quite common in Europe. They seem to be smaller scale, and they seem to be associated with the dairy industry. We find in North Carolina here that they're popping up connected with the swine or pork industry. Those places are a little bit different because the digestion requires a lot of water or to keep it wet, and the dairy manure and the pork or swine manure is already more wet. The chicken litter requires a lot more adding of water. But as far as documenting problems after the fact, we've seen some, they're just new enough to the United States that we don't have a lot of documentation yet. We've seen in some locations in the Midwest where these facilities open in connection with the pork industry and new farms start cropping up. So we see that problem magnified, but it's sort of like, well, we'd love to tell people the damage that it has done, but we have to wait for it to do the damage in order to prove it. So in some ways, it's harder for us to play prevention because we can't point to a state right now that's been devastated by them. We hope to in the future not be able to, yeah, that's one way that we would like to go about documenting this and be on certainly that we're in line with science. So we're trying to remain as fact-based as possible. And as far as I know, we've only stuck to the facts. But
what about the potential for fire and explosion? This is explosive stuff.
Yeah, they say, oh, it's not going to be explosive because it's going to be damp. But at some point, they're going to ship it to the pipeline in trucks, and I assume they're not going to. I assume that they're going to refine it to be more combustible before they transport it. And in Georgetown, they're planning to generate electricity out of it, so that's got to be in a combustible state. I have not run across a story of a methane truck exploding, but it is, I believe, theoretically possible. Some of our allies have been calling them bomb trucks, but I try to shy away from that language because, like I said, I don't know of one that's blown up yet. And I hope not to know of one that blows up.
Well, Dee might. She's been in the industry. I'm a truck driver. I know they blow up sometimes, not necessarily methane, but it doesn't really matter which kind of flammable gas you're hauling. It's a hazardous material because it's explosive, and it's placarded that way. And if one of these trucks happens to run off the road, these tanks are pretty hard to breach, but if they do get breached, or if there's a fire from another source that heats the tank so that the liquid in it breaches the tank through expansion, that's called a burning liquid evaporative vapor explosion, BLEVE for short. You can see these things on YouTube. They look like a miniature nuclear explosion. And if methane is liquefied to transport it, and there's a breach and the liquid runs into a sewer system, I think Cleveland, Ohio lost a couple of square blocks of buildings in one of those explosions because a flammable gas that was liquefied ran into a sewer system and something torched it. It's not fun stuff. It's not common. These are very strong tanks. But one reason that I don't drive these trucks, I turned down a job doing it, is because there's a safety valve in the bottom of these tanks, which is required to be operative, and they're routinely not checked. The maintenance and monitoring programs on these valves. In other words, if you drive a car under one of these trucks and it breaks loose all the piping, the product inside is supposed to be contained by a valve at the bottom of the tank, which is activated by the pressure in the tank to hold that product inside the tank. But the valves, because it's in order to check one of these valves, it's expensive. You have to drain the tank completely. You have to clean it out completely so there's no residue of this flammable substance in there. Then you have to open a hatch on the top and send somebody down inside it to check the valve. That's hard to do. So it's I don't want to go into too much. I've already gone into too much detail, but that's what I found out online when I started studying, the possibilities of being on top of one of these things, driving it down the road. I have to look after my own skin, because if you're a trucker, other people don't do that for you.
Yeah. Very dangerous profession, and this would just make
Thanks, David. John, if I could just say real quick, and then I'll turn it to John. I don't know about trucks exploding, and what you said was interesting, but I did do a little bit of work in my past life on pipelines, and I put a link in there to an organization. If you haven't been in touch with, you might want to get in touch with. They're based right here in Chester County, PA. So it's another aspect to what you're doing that you might want to connect with them, and they might be very helpful to you. Anyway, John?
I was just going to say that, the only way to keep if they let this thing go forward, it then draws in, it's going to attract the problem in maybe a wildly larger scale than it already is. And so if we, it's like there's already a problem, but this would then magnify it. And so that's the reason to be against it, is we don't want to be attracting all this waste into our environment. And then we are going to be left with the consequences of all that, those byproducts, as well as the risks and the traffic and the pollution and the night, all the whole thing.
Yeah.
And so
heading in the wrong direction rather than finding a more sustainable solution.
Yeah, and we're attracting the problem to us without really a good solution. And it seems like we shouldn't be heading toward in that direction. We should be trying to figure out a better way to do things before we want to attract it.
Yeah.
Yep. So,
I-
right.
I think part of the difficulty, and I live in the middle of the state right now. I live in Kent County. But I think a lot of the people that would be more skeptical of industry and more concerned about the environment tend to live in Newcastle County and aren't as familiar with the operations of the poultry industry and how it affects the environment and the consequences of these operations. People in Sussex County, where I was raised, when every year they spread the poultry manure on the fields, and you can smell it. And there's a joke I hear over and over again, which is, you know what that smell is? That's the smell of money. And there's just an understanding that this is part of people's livelihoods and they need to accept it. So Sussex County people are less likely to oppose it, and Newcastle County or Sussex County people are more likely to support it, and Newcastle County people are more likely to not know about it. I spoke to a state legislator a couple weeks ago. He had asked me about the nitrate pollution, and I told him that Delaware ranks first in the nation in nitrate pollution. Maryland, which is number 2, has 30-some% of its wells polluted. Delaware, which is number 1, has more than 50% of its wells polluted. But anyway, when I was talking to this legislator, he represents northern Newcastle County, and he said, yeah, can you tell me what the poultry industry does with its waste? And to me, that was like asking what color the sky was. I mean, I've known about chicken litter since I was a kid. My wife, who's from Kansas, says Delaware smells like feet because of it. But anyway, making the connection between Newcastle County voters and Sussex County issues is a little bit difficult. But I'm willing to go from group to group and talk to as many people as I can to make that connection.
I will say that that is true, except for perhaps the last, decade or so with the, population growth along the coast in coastal towns, and a lot of people coming there to retire, like from Washington, D.C. and whatnot. I think there's definitely a group of people, and maybe you've been in touch with them, but that sort of in the coastal Sussex County that are advocates and concerned about the environment and whatnot, and should be interested in this. Dave?
Yeah, what happens if you tell people living near the coast that they can't go in the water in the bay because Pfiesteria outbreaks are nourished by nitrogen runoff, and now they might try to turn it around and say, well, this is going to get rid of the nitrogen by composting it and creating methane out of it. I don't know what the answer to that would be, but it's
That makes it a tourism issue as well.
Yeah, I was thinking that.
Well, the digestion doesn't get rid of the nitrogen. I mean, it might get rid of some, but most of it remains. I think it gets rid of phosphorus, maybe more. I'm not as sure on the chemistry, but it doesn't have a significant reduction in what's left there. I mean, after these new bio or microorganisms release the gas, they die, and their microscopic bodies all add up to be the waste. But I've spoken to some Eastern Sussex groups, and some have been supportive. Of course, we've got the Center for the Inland Bays there. Like I said, they're on Purdue's payroll, or at least they take Purdue funding, and they're also going from group to group, telling people why this is good. Now, this is the same group that thinks a pipe from Rehoboth Beach out to the ocean for all the sewage is a good idea. So maybe they're not sticklers on the issue, but.
Greg, the other thought I had, and John, I don't know if you were involved in it at all. I was not, but I know, a few years ago there was when Bloom Energy was, proposing its facility, and there was a lot of advocates fighting that, and the fact that natural, I may have this wrong, so correct me, but natural gas was being touted as a renewable energy, and it goes to what you were saying, Greg, that it is, I guess, categorized that way, which makes no sense to me at all. But I guess, so one of my questions, I guess, for Greg is if you've been in touch with anyone and we can help make that connection if need be, but if you've been in touch with anyone that was involved in the Bloom Energy conversation and battle, because they might be helpful to you
I
in that
have,
regard.
I have not, and I would appreciate that connection. Bloom gets raised as a zinger, like, oh, this is a green project. Well, that's going to be like Bloom Energy. And they tend to throw that out for everything from wind to solar to everything else. But
Newark fought it off, right, John? Aren't
Yeah.
I right? And then they built it elsewhere?
Well, there was a plant that they were trying to build in Newark that was not a Bloom plant,
Oh, okay.
but it was going to be right in the middle of Newark.
Mm.
And so it was just the fact of having a power plant in the middle of residential area. So
Okay.
they did fight that away. And then that's the one I think that they then were talking about moving it downstate. But the thing about, with Bloom, they partly sold that idea is that Bloom was renewable because it was going to use this kind of natural gas. Supposedly, if it used this kind of natural gas instead of piping it in from, traditional sources that are just underground deposits, it ended up that they're using all the unrenewable part is what Bloom has been running on. So it's totally should not be counted in the renewable category, but
Yeah.
it's just sort of a fiasco that is just continuing for more years. But again, it was the renewable part was, oh, we'll use this methane from other sources like landfill or something like this.
Mm-hmm.
So this would be enabling. This would be another terrible idea to call it renewable thing when it's like something the opposite of what the purpose of renewable is really.
Right.
Clean,
Right. Exactly.
non-carbon renewable.
Right.
We found that like in the pipelines, when they do this, it is just a small percentage of the so-called renewable gas mixed with fracked gas and gas from other sources. But that allows the entire industry to put a green label on what they do and tell people that it's a good idea. Oh, it's clean, it's healthy, it's natural. Yeah, I guess technically it is natural, but not in the sense that I would like to.
Plenty of toxic stuff is natural.
Yeah.
All right. Well, are there any other questions or comments? I know we're sort of coming up at the end of our stated time, end time.
Oh, yeah, that's right, 1:15. Well, what about the, is there a way are they responsible for paying back any of this state support? Are these loans or are they grants that's being discussed? Bonds, I think you said.
The bonds are not technically state money. Somehow it's set up so that Sussex County can approve the sale of bonds, but it doesn't necessarily support them. So I assume if you're selling a bond, it's paid back to whomever buys it. But it was within Sussex County's power to say yes or no. And they said yes. Like I said, in a meeting that was not very well advertised. The governor's plan of supporting renewable natural gas, as he called it, would suggest to me that down the road there will be state incentives funding this kind of operation. I'm just now learning about renewable portfolio standards, which Food and Water Watch is working on in Maryland. We haven't worked on it in Delaware yet, but those are state subsidies that they give to supposedly green sources of renewable energy. And yet where they have these subsidies, most of them go to things like this and not as much to wind and solar. So we just think this is more money indirectly being funneled into the poultry operations as they currently exist.
I'm just wondering if the taxpayers are likely to wind up holding the bag if there's a disruption in the poultry industry. We're on the fine edge of high pathogenicity avian influenza all the time, In the late 80s, I think there were 32 or 38 million chickens slaughtered in the state of Pennsylvania to avoid this, the chance of this spreading to people. It's a pandemic that keeps epidemiologists awake, from what I read at night. That's only tangential to this, unless it's possible to show that the numbers are cooked. And for example, another possibility would be Delaware's in Reggie. That obligates whoever runs this plant to pay something for letting this 5% of the methane into the atmosphere. And the cost is likely to escalate as the years go by, I imagine. I don't know exactly how Reggie works, but since Delaware's in the compact, have those numbers actually been considered? Is it going to make these bonds less valuable? Leave the state holding the bag somehow? I don't really know how it works, but I know we're getting close to the end of the meeting. But it just my favorite sign from one of the demonstrations, street demonstrations I was at in Philadelphia a few years ago was "Follow the money."
Absolutely. And
Always. It's true. Yeah. And Sierra, I know, Greg, you've been in, at least assume you've been in touch with the Sierra Club, because
Yeah.
I know they're a signer. So, but I know they've been working on Reggie and the renewable portfolio standard. John, I don't know if you've been involved in that, but definitely, Sherry would be really helpful on that issue, on that side of things.
Yeah, we've been in touch. I got a quote from her this week for our press release, but I'm in contact with her and Dustin at least
Okay.
every couple months.
Yeah.
Should be
Okay.
more often.
Good. Well, this has been really helpful for me just to learn more about what's going on, and hopefully it has been for all of you as well. So I appreciate everybody tuning in today. And I guess, Greg, just please keep in touch with us, and as things develop and any action, hearings coming up or anything like that we might, should know about.
I will absolutely do that. Thank you very much for having
Okay.
me today.
Yeah, you're welcome. Thanks, everybody. Have a great couple weeks during the holidays, and hopefully see everybody in the new year.
Thank you.
Take care.